You're listening to Reckless Creatives, a Pipeline Artists original podcast, where Sadie, Dean, and Jeanne Bowerman share the candid truth about the challenges and benefits of living life as artists. You're not looking?
Well,
we need a little slate to like slap us in, or just to slap us.
A hand that comes in.
Yeah, a hand that just comes in and slaps us aside the head. That'd be awesome. Stop. Take two.
Stop. Do it again.
This is Jeanne Bowerman of Pipeline Artists.
And this is Sadie Dean from Script Magazine.
And we are doing our second episode of Reckless Creatives podcast, following up our first episode, which was all about failure. And well received. I don't think it failed. What do you think?
I don't think so either. I think it's getting a lot of love on social media. Everyone that I've shared it with, they've really liked it. I've sent it to my mom, but I haven't heard back. So I don't know if that's good or not.
I know better than to send it to my mother. She would, because she'd just love anything I did. Like she would just be like, oh, it's great. It's great. It's great. Yeah, because she's a mom, but she's a great mom. She's 89. We'll have to have like a mom conversation one day, because, you know, these people who birthed the Reckless Creatives deserve a little kudos for sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there are a lot of jerk parents out there who wouldn't let people be reckless.
Yeah.
So I hear you've got some quotes for us today, Sadie Dean.
I do. Yeah, we actually have a really cool podcast today. We're interviewing Spike Scarberry. He seems like he's like the jack of all trades of screenwriting and TV writing. So I'm really excited to pick his brain about everything that I don't know, which is a lot.
The first step to being reckless is admitting you don't know anything.
I know nothing about that. So I have a few quotes here from both Larry David and Fran Lebowitz, and we're going to play a little game with you, Jeannie.
Oh, God.
Edit. But first, because our topic today is about success and whatever that may look like to any of you, the first one I found was from one of my favorite writers, who is Mark Twain. And his quote is, "To succeed in life, you need two things: ignorance and confidence."
Yeah. I mean,
I think I lean towards ignorance, but that's my stupid thought.
And that's an interesting question, because I interviewed James Kicklighter the other day, who is a documentarian, filmmaker, also does narrative film, but he did this, it'll be on Pipeline Artists. He did this really cool movie called The Sound of Identity, and about a trans opera singer performing Don Giovanni in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Really, really cool. And it was, when I talked to him about his younger self and advice he would have given his younger self and all of that, and he said something really cool, like that you think when you start that I'm just have to make this short film or make this feature film or do this, and then I'll have opened the doors to Hollywood. I would have climbed that mountain. And then he goes, and then you do that and you get up on the top of the mountain and you realize there is nothing but a whole bunch of more mountains in front of you. You know, that they're just like, it's this wide expanse of things you need to conquer or try. And he was saying that for him, he took on this specific role as director and editor of this doc because it made him really nervous and made him uncomfortable. And then he knew, I have to do this. And so when it comes to that ignorance aspect of it, I do think that sometimes when you like, if you knew everything you know about how whatever art it is you're pursuing, whether it's music or writing or filmmaking or acting or whatever, like if after you've been in the game for a few years, if you had known all of that, when you first started, would you have done it? And
Yeah.
maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah, and I feel like though, as a creative, especially with writing and music, I'm constantly learning new things, new tricks or new just things about how I can play or convey something as an artist, and that's always really exciting because there is still a lot that I don't know, in both worlds. So
Yeah, totally. And I've always maintained it takes about like 8 years to really know how to write. Like, I mean, I'd love to ask Spike that too, because he's got some great advice. He has a really great column up on Pipeline Artist site. And I don't have favorite children, but I really love reading his stuff because it's he tells
it's
it,
real.
right. It's sort of like the same kind of stance I took in doing Balls of Steel. Like that I just wanted to tell people what they needed to hear, not necessarily what they wanted to hear, knowing that they wouldn't really be happy sometimes hearing the things I had to say, but they were honest, at least from my experience. Everybody has totally different experiences. So like, I like that raw, honest thing.
Yeah, me too.
For sure.
Good. It's really good. It's stuff that we need to hear, and it's reassuring too, especially when you just have no confidence in yourself on certain days or hours or minutes of the week.
Yeah.
Which often, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, so I have 3 more quotes for you, and they're either from Larry David or Fran Lebowitz. Are you ready, Jeannie?
I think so. I think I've watched enough Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I'm not sure I could tell. I'm going to get them all wrong.
The first one is, "You're only as good as your last haircut."
I think that's Larry.
No.
No, Fran?
Yeah.
See, wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I'm putting 1 in the wrong column. Next time, I was not told there was going to be a test. And I think next time I'm going to have to test you on something.
Yeah, I think it's unfair with all the homework you gave on the first podcast. You gave a lot of homework
Oh, to everybody?
This is
I did. I'm sorry.
pay back on their behalf.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
I hope you did it though.
Oh, I have my Angry Charlie box with the it's in the other room.
Oh, cool.
I hope the people did it too. I'm sure they did. Everyone should listen to Jeannie. Here's the second one. "Success didn't spoil me. I've always been insufferable."
Okay, well that has to be Larry.
No.
Are you giving me all Fran ones? See, now I know. See, here's the thing. So now I know that the third one has to be Larry.
Yeah. And this is pretty good, actually.
Okay.
And I was very surprised when I saw this one. I was like, that doesn't sound like Larry David. But
so you purposely picked one that was going to be hard, wanting me to fail.
I believed in you. I always believed in you, Jeannie.
All right, give it to me.
So this one's really good.
Okay.
"When you're not concerned with succeeding, you can work with complete freedom."
See, I would have thought that was Fran.
I wouldn't believe it's from either of them. It's
no.
Right?
Yeah, it was very optimistic.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see what Spike thinks about success and failure, because we're going to ask him.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. Here we go.
Well, I was getting something very important for this podcast, and it's a gigantic mimosa that I just made myself. So
that is very wise.
I was getting something very important for this podcast, and it's
tequila. I knew there was a reason we got along.
And Spike.
Oh, there you go. That's what I'm talking about.
Wild turkey honey whiskey.
You get that wild turkey going on. Okay.
We have and by the way, we have nothing planned.
Usually a good recipe for success there.
Yeah. We're all about failure. You've already made a mistake.
I'm so glad. I feel like I'm set up for such success here since you guys are all about failure. I trust you.
Yeah. That's your first mistake.
I'm just the guest here. So, I mean,
That's
I'm
right.
following
There's
y'all's
nothing.
lead.
Exactly. There's no pressure on you at all. If this fails, it's all on us.
There you go.
So we're here with Spike Scarberry. And Spike, there's probably, I know you've got these really great articles up on Pipeline Artists because I read them.
Glad somebody does.
Yes. Well, I'm actually the first person to read them, unless you give them to your girlfriend or whatever. So why don't you tell, for those people who aren't reading your articles yet, those 5 people, why don't you just give us a little, idea of where your background is and where your perspective is going to be coming from in this conversation.
And why I got invited to be on a podcast.
Is this your first podcast?
It's actually my second podcast, only because when I was in LA, I had 2 friends who tried to break into the podcasting world, and they did like a joke podcast, and I was a guest for that. But there was like no topic. So there was like nothing to where like it was like, oh, this guy's talking about something that he's actually qualified to speak about. I was just like a random guy who joined their podcast. And I think we ended up talking about like male genitals for most of the time, as men are wont to do. That's generally how just like guys get together and we just start talking about those things. But
is that podcast like documented somewhere, like an archive somewhere? We'll have to like dig it up and link to it in the comments.
I really hope not. If it is, I want to get it taken down because I don't remember what I said. As you know, Jeanne, excuse me.
Jeannie.
Jeannie, excuse me. I got it right the first time.
Yeah, you did.
Right the first time. But as you know, I am wont to just say whatever is on my mind, which gets me in trouble all the time. So I really don't remember what I said during that podcast, and I am just kind of hoping that it doesn't exist anywhere because it could be really bad for me. I don't know.
Well, why don't you take another sip of that mimosa?
I see where this is going.
Exactly. Just gonna loosen you up, let you say anything you want to say, like don't hold back. And meanwhile, we haven't even found out anything about you yet.
No, but other than I have no filter, which I'm sure will become readily apparent as this goes on. But to answer your question, my name is Spike. I like long walks on the beach and candlelight dinners and dynamic storytelling in all forms. I was the kid who at 6 years old was sitting about 2 inches away from the television watching Luke Skywalker blow up the Death Star. And I was like, yep, that's what I want to do. I want to make movies for the rest of my life. I want to give little boys and little girls and little every gender identity in between kids out there the same feeling of that I could just fly that I got from watching that movie. I mean, I was hooked. I knew that was my destination. That was where I was going to go in life. I had this like roaring fire in the pit of my stomach that I had to make it out to Los Angeles. And I had to be part of the business. So I graduated film school in 3 years, a year early, because I did summer sessions because I wanted to get out there as fast as possible, drove across the country, didn't know anybody. And it's funny, on my drive to LA, I think somewhere around Iowa or something, I said to myself, Spike, if you end up in television, you're a complete failure. You should just like go home back to the East Coast and just like live the rest of your life as a barista at Starbucks or something if you end up in television.
Why did you think television was a failure?
Because at that point, premium TV had not become a thing. I was just so obsessed with movies. Trust me, this will come back at some point. I will eat my words. Trust me.
Yeah.
Because I spent the majority of my career in television, actually, after the peak TV movement and all of that happened. But essentially, I got to LA as a bright-eyed 21-year-old kid, stayed with cousins on their couch while I interned at a bunch of places, ended up getting a job at a financier, learned how little movies get money and how they get made and sold overseas and how much money you can make selling those like crappy little Wesley Snipes action movies to like Uganda. Like people make bank doing that. And it's surprising just how that business runs. But from there, I went to an agency, went to a production company that did a superhero franchise, once I realized that the movie industry was not quite what I thought it was, went to a television network for like 4.5 years. Which is where I got the most of my experience as the TV landscape kind of boomed and became just as good, if not a better place for premium content than the movie screen was. And so after about 9 years of that, and we can get into all the whys and hows and this thing happened, I just I burned out on the business. I saw what the beast was, and I knew that there was nothing that I could do to change it. And I knew that while, yes, there was a pathway for me to like work for 20, 25 years and like climb to the top of the mountain and then finally have that decision-making power that I was so hungry for, at that time, I realized that my fire had just gone out. I did not want to continue doing that anymore. I was living such a miserable existence, toiling away in the machine that is Tinseltown, that I just could not see myself continuing with it any longer. Eventually, the company that I was working for got acquired by a larger company. And whenever that happens, there's always layoffs. And my company knew that I was unhappy. So I think that they made the easy cut where they were like, we're just going to lay this guy off. We're going to give him a very nice severance package. We're going to let him go his own way. And I had a decision to make. Was I going to jump back into the field and try it again in a different company, knowing more than likely how I was going to feel? Because there's a pretty clear cycle for me, at least. So I decided that I knew how this business made me feel. I wanted to see if a different industry made me feel otherwise. So I've moved back to the East Coast during the pandemic, where I started a coaching business where I now work with amateur writers who want to get into Hollywood, want to get coached by somebody who's been on the development side, worked at the networks, worked at the studios, has passed on their scripts more than likely. And I teach them, hey, this is how you actually impress the people who are behind that desk. This is how you actually get their attention from the mind of somebody who's done that. And so that's basically what brings me here today. And then at some point, I found Matt, who introduced me to you, and now I write articles with no filter for Pipeline Artists. That's how we got connected, Jeanne.
Yes, and I love that. Now, you were in the business side for so long, and one of the things that Sadie and I talk about a lot, not necessarily on the podcast because we just started this, but in life, that the writer's not understanding anything about the business. Do you also write? Like, I want to ask that question.
I was going to ask the same question. Do you write?
It's something that the short answer is yes, but it's much more of a hobby at this point, because like when I was transitioning from West Coast to East Coast, I stayed with basically, here's a funny story. So
tell it.
When I got laid off, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and I had no idea. And so I'm thinking, do I get another industry job? Do I get a job someplace else? If so, where is it? Like, the world is my oyster. I could go anywhere. Like, I don't even know where to begin looking. And so one night, as I was having this existential dilemma, I was on Facebook and I saw an ad. Have I told you the story, Jeanne?
No.
Okay.
No.
And the ad said, relax, eat well, advance science. And I think to myself, well, this has to be bullshit. It has to be fake. So I click on it, because what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
It was not fake. It was an actual ad for a medical study sponsored by Harvard, Boston Children's Hospital, and a bunch of other universities that essentially was paying people money, actual money, to live in Boston while medical researchers studied your body, while you ate their food, lost weight, and then they did like medical tests on you.
Oh my God. Can I do this study?
They were paying $10,000 for you to lose 40 pounds. So I was like, well, that sounds fun and interesting. And I never would have thought I would have done that. So I applied, I got in, and that's the story of how I drove to Boston to live in a hospital/hotel for 6 months while researchers studied my body, fed me food, and like I had to lose weight for them. I'm basically staying in a hotel with a bunch of dudes, and we have nothing to talk about but our life experience. And so the fact that I had come from Hollywood came up. There were more than one screenwriter in this group, by the way. There were like 3 people trying to write a screenplay. And so they gravitated towards me. I know, completely shocking. But I told them about what I did, my side business, and working with writers and doing contest judging and things like that. And they kept telling me, it's like, man, you know so much about story. You should write something. And I hesitated with that for a very, very long time. And it's because I know intimately well the plight of the professional writer. Like, I know, yes, you can talk about like, there are the Aaron Sorkins of the world. And there are, all of these A-level writers who make millions of dollars to write a screenplay or to write novels or things like that. They're the minority. Like the majority of Hollywood people are just people. They're just working Joes who are trying to get a paycheck. And I've seen too much of them struggle. And so like when people were like, you should write something, you like, you know, this, like you can break in. I was just like, but do I want to? Because one of the things that pushed me out of Hollywood is I looked around me and I was like, nobody's happy. Like everyone's miserable doing this. Like, why am I continuing to kill myself over a dream I had when I was 6 years old, just because I want to follow my childhood dream, even though it doesn't make sense when I'm 26 or 30 or whatever age I was at the time. So I didn't really want to push for the idea of being a professional writer, even though I think that I have knowledge that could benefit me in that way, only because I felt like, what's the point? Like, I know professional writers struggle. And then just to see, you know, people like all of the trials and tribulations of the business, being intimately aware of how the business works and how much luck goes into you know, a professional writing career. Not to say that there is no skill involved, but to say that luck is not a vital aspect of what we do would be naive. That's why I didn't want to like commit to being a writer professionally, because I was like, I don't see myself being happy in that way. That being said, I have ideas in my head. One of the things that I learned, one of the many things that I learned upon leaving Los Angeles, was that I didn't love movies necessarily. What I loved was storytelling. I love the feeling when a story grabs you and transports you to another world and just makes you completely forget about your own and you lose time in it. That's the best feeling for me.
Yeah.
So I definitely enjoy, you know, being a narrator, and I have ideas of my own that I would love to get out on paper, because quite frankly, they've been bugging me for years, but I'm not going to hinge my financial success on it. I can't, I'm too analytical to just take the full-on dive and completely be a creative. But I do dabble in some forms of storytelling. We'll see if anything ever happens with it, but that's,
I mean,
a very, very long answer to your question.
No, and I have had the pleasure of a sneak peek at some of Spike's graphic novel. You have a really great writing voice, like
Thank you.
really great. And I
appreciate that.
I think the world would be entertained by the stories that you have to tell. Just to kind of back up for a second, like you had this dream, this six-year-old kid has this dream. I mean, you've now gone to the East Coast, so left Hollywood. Do you, in fitting with our theme of our first episode, and we're also talking a little bit about success today, like what that means to you, like, do you, like, how would you define failure and success?
Oh, wow. What a question.
Da da da. Okay, you can have another sip of your mimosa.
I think it's a question that I'm still figuring out how to answer for myself, because like I told you, for the longest time, my success was entirely driven by career accomplishment. Like, one of the issues that I learned about myself, and one of the things that I'm trying to fix now, is when I was in LA, I didn't think of myself as Spike Scarberry human being. I thought of myself as Spike Scarberry film producer. And when the film producing aspect of my life wasn't going well, AKA most of the time, I wasn't feeling good about me. And so that was not a healthy way to look at success. But in terms of figuring out what success is now, I mean, the only thing I can think of is just to give the stereotypical answer, just be happy. And I definitely think I'm definitely more successful today than I was 2 years ago. Do I think I'm perfectly successful yet? No. But I'm getting there. I'm building a better life for myself day by day, brick by brick, trying to get to the place I want to go. Working out this answer in my head now, that comes down to freedom. Like, knowing when I was in LA, there were so many things I couldn't do. Like, I was surrounded by this awesome city. We had all these things going on. There was always a pop-up bar or a show at the Pantages, or you know, a cool event at the beach. They would have the Cirque du Soleil coming in. Things came to Los Angeles. I could rarely afford to do them. Like, I rarely had the money because I was paying ridiculous amounts in rent. Gas was over $4. A sandwich was $12, not counting the drink or the chips or whatever else you wanted to get. I could rarely afford to actually go to the pop-up bar without in the back of my head being like, you shouldn't be spending this money. So I didn't, because again, I'm too analytical to just say, F it, YOLO, as some of my friends do. So for me, what I want in my future is I want a future where I am free to do anything that I choose, go wherever I want to go. And one of the reasons I left LA is I could more easily achieve that freedom not in the third most expensive city in America.
Yeah.
And I could achieve that much more easily in a city that doesn't have a high cost of living. So
yeah.
I mean, I can't afford to live here. It's insane. Yeah. I mean, I kind of did the same thing as you, Spike, where I remember I moved to Silver Lake of all places because it was the hip place to be. And I found a great spot that was like right around the corner from my favorite bar. And then I moved there and I never once visited that bar. And I actually have a meeting with Matt next week. And it's basically a coffee shop that was across the street from my house. And I was like, I remember walking by there, but I could never afford to go in. I couldn't even afford to go to 7-Eleven because it was too expensive.
Right.
I think that's really cool that you were able to pivot into something I think you are. I think you're changing the way that we could start seeing Hollywood from a different perspective, from your perspective after being in the trenches for so long. Writers and creatives, that perspective of like, this is really what happens. Brace yourself. It's not all glitz and glamour, but you gotta put in the work and be ready for whatever's gonna happen, because whatever is gonna happen, and it's either gonna be really great or it's gonna be terrible.
Right.
You can learn from those things and hopefully not be so miserable from the outcome.
So what do you guys, I've never lived in LA. I've gone out there to visit. I live in upstate New York in the country in the middle of nowhere. I love it. I get on a plane. I go to LA when I need to go. And I kind of feel like, I know like everybody says, if you want to be in the industry, certainly TV, you've got to move to LA. And I get that, I get the TV part. But like, I got to say, when I go into LA, I can set up myself with meetings. People know I don't live there. So it's almost like, oh, Jeannie's going to be in town this week. I need to make sure I have time to meet her. So like I end up, some of my friends who've been in LA for 10 years say to me, you know more people here than I do, because like when you're there, you don't always do the stuff that they say you can serendipitously run into people or whatever. Like I don't want to make the trip across country until everything's opened up again, because it defeats the purpose. Like if I'm going to go all the way out there, I want to see as many people as I can see. And one of the things I would always do is, if like I meet a bunch of people on social media. So if I knew a casting director and I knew an actor and I knew a producer and I knew an indie filmmaker and I knew whatever, I would kind of try to figure out who should meet each other. And I would say, okay, on X night, I'm going to be in Studio City. Let's all meet at this bar at this time. And then they would come together. They'd see me, but they would see each other and meet each other. And then they'd have warm and fuzzy feelings about me because they met somebody who could help them in some way.
And also, I was mostly an assistant coming up. Toward the end, I was basically, I don't want to say I was a development executive without the title, but I was doing all the things that development executives do just without the title. For me, there's not much other than just like the knowing somebody at that company that I can provide them, just being a general contact. For you, they might be like, oh, well, this is somebody with credits. I could bring that to my boss and I could look good. Or she might have a spec sometime that gets really hot and then I know her and then she'll slip it to me first. So there's like, this is another issue in the Hollywood system, is that everyone's out for themselves, which again is like life. But I always tell people that Hollywood is like real life, but like amped up to 11, because everything is just more intense out there. And so everyone's looking out for themselves. And so everyone's looking out for that thing that can help them the most. And then when you leave, and you can't help them anymore. Like your contact list like drops to basically none. When you realize, because you know it when you're there, but when you realize that the only reason people were talking to you is so that they could have had a contact at Warner Brothers. Like you were their contact at Warner Brothers, and now that you're not at Warner Brothers, they need to find a new one of you. They weren't trying to actually be friends with you. They were being friends with the position that you held.
Yeah.
And that's a little depressing.
Yeah.
And there was something that Sadie said that I'm trying to remember now because I wanted to go back to it. Talking about living in LA, not being able to go anywhere. Crap, I forgot what it was. I'll remember it in a second. But you made a really good point about something, Sadie, and I wanted to call
Was
it
it the not going to the bar, the coffee shop that was right across the street? Or...
Yeah, there was something about that, but I think it was around that, but I forgot exactly what it was.
See, we have a commercial that comes on every time.
It's a reminder to take your vitamins for optimal brain power.
Because I do that a lot, Spike. I forget what I'm supposed to say. I'll be like, okay, we need like that. What is that Prevagen commercial? Like, you know, whatever that thing is to come on to remind me. And then it'll come back to you for sure. Just to not completely deter people who do still want to do this for a living, like from moving to LA or all of that kind of stuff. Like, what advice would you give the person who is like, you know what, that may have been your experience, Spike, but you know, maybe I've got a trust fund, or maybe I've got big savings, or maybe I've got whatever, I'm going to move. But so how should those people best take advantage of that decision?
So this actually, you reminded me of the thing that Sadie said that I wanted to compliment, because you were talking about how, yeah, you living in Los Angeles and like you can't afford to live there. And the entire idea being that if you don't go, you'll never know. Like my breakup with LA was painful. It hurt. I'm not going to tell you that it wasn't. Like I had to go through a grieving process of my old dream. And I went through that and I came out clean on the other side. But I don't regret doing it because I know that if I didn't do it, if I just went into another industry straight out of college and I was now a 30-year-old guy, I'd still be thinking about Hollywood. And having done it now, I know that it's not the thing for me. What advice do I give to people who still want to go out there and do it? I think what I just said, like I can tell you what it's like until I'm blue in the face. You're not going to believe it until you go through it yourself because you haven't experienced the thing that I've experienced. Now, there's a lot of common denominators in people who work in the business who all kind of say most of the exact same stuff, but the human brain isn't really wired to hear other people's pain and then believe it. It's wired to say, oh, this is happening to me now. I need to avoid this. So I don't think even if I told them all the stuff that I'm saying about my horrible experience with it, that it would register. So you should still do it. Just know, the advice I would really give is just know that it's not everything. Because one of the big issues with Los Angeles and the film industry in general is that it's never directly stated, but there's a feeling and like a subtext through the whole industry of superiority, of like, oh, we're the tastemakers. We work in Hollywood. Everyone thinks that what we do is so cool. And if you can't make it, well, that just means you couldn't cut it. That's not the case. Sometimes the industry just isn't for you. It's not for every personality type. I could still be out there. Like I knew enough people, I had enough career experience where I'm sure that if I wanted to get that next job, I could have done it. I made the choice to value myself and my mental health more than that. There's nothing wrong with saying, I want to do something else. It's a big country. It's a big world. Like Hollywood is its own little Hogwarts. Things that matter in Hollywood oftentimes don't matter to the rest of the world, and don't get seduced into thinking that they do.
With the state of the world, I mean, now it's kind of getting healthy again, but do you see a trend that writers or filmmakers are spreading outside of LA and still able to work in the industry the same capacity as they were before?
I would like to think so. That being said, I don't know because I wasn't in the LA during the pandemic times, but in order to keep the business running, I'm sure people had to do pitches over Zoom. I'm sure they had to do general meetings over Zoom. I feel like if anything, my guess would be that it probably normalized it. And I don't think as a writer, you have to live in LA. Because like Jeanne, you talked about that idea of like, you could just randomly run into somebody at a coffee shop or at the Century City Mall, That like never happened to me.
Right.
And obviously, like I said, I was poor, didn't go out a lot. I'm an introvert, not a natural networker like it seems that you are. But I don't think that that happens as often as people say that it does. I feel like if Hollywood wants you, it's going to be because of your material. The connections are definitely an important part. Don't say that, don't let me tell you that they're not. But if you write a great script, you've written a great script. Doesn't matter if you lived in LA or Alaska. Like I think that you'll be able to make something of yourself. So I would hope that the answer to your question, Sadie, is yes, but I don't know 100%.
Yeah. And like the other thing people always talk about, a lot of writers, and you've discussed this in one of your articles, one of your first ones, about people stealing their ideas. Like there's a lengthy article that you can go read on Pipeline Artists about that. That's by Grote, but
I spat fire in that article.
Yeah, like maybe just give a little quick synopsis of why that is not something people should freak out about.
Quick synopsis, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Long synopsis, as I said in the article, has it happened before? Of course it has. Of course it has. But the times where it does get such outsized levels of attention that it totally like overblows the entire problem. The issue is that studios, and I'm going to basically repeat my article, studios don't pay for ideas. Like if I'm a studio head and Jeanne, you have an idea for a movie about a squirrel and the squirrel's hoarding nuts for the winter, and then all of a sudden a farmer chops his tree down for firewood and his nuts are gone. He has to find a way to survive. If you were like, hey, I've got this idea for you, I'd go, cool, you gonna write it? And if the answer is yes, I might pay for it, but I'm not paying for your idea. I'm prepaying for your script. Hollywood pays for well-executed ideas. Like you bringing me an idea, which then I have to go find a writer to execute it well, means nothing to me. It's a bunch of time that I have to waste trying to find somebody who's available who can do this type of movie. It's a bunch of money I have to waste trying to see if this idea even comes out well. It's just not something that really happens. And if you're worried about being at a coffee shop and another writer hearing your idea and going and stealing it, again, there's counterpoints to that, because it takes like 3 to 6 months to write something. And so if you've got the script ready and they're still writing it and your script's good, I mean, you'll need to have the connections, but you have the advantage there in terms of getting it sold. And even then, let's just say that the writer goes out and they write an idea or they write a script off the premise of your idea. The execution is going to be entirely different. They're going to have different characters. They're going to have different subplots. There are like a base idea being the same as something else does not mean like that someone stole it. If you want to look at the Kung Fu Panda situation, where you can trace back to the father being a goose and the trainer being that little lemur monkey and the ultimate wise one being a turtle, then okay, maybe you have an example of someone really stealing every little aspect of your idea. But unless someone's going through and taking lines of dialogue or specific characters and specific storylines and emotional plot points, if someone just takes the premise and then does an entirely different take on it, then sorry to tell you, that's not stealing your idea. All that is saying, I'm taking this premise and I'm doing my version of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So it's really, it's not something that really happens enough that people need to worry about at that level. That at the level of people who worry about it way more than they should.
It's like ideas aren't copyrightable either. So I'm curious about your clients that you work with. Are they all screenwriters, or do some of them write novels or graphic novels, or are they mostly all screenwriters?
Most of them are screenwriters. I have one novelist client who I'm working with. That one takes much more time because novels are much wordier. But the general idea is still the same. The narrative formula that most young writers who are emerging need to know is going to remain consistent throughout the entire process.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of people crossing over and trying different things because like you said, like screenwriting is, I mean, it's almost like the industry is set up to say no. And yeah. And so, but you've got this story, this spec script on your hard drive. Why not adapt it into a novel and even self-publish it if you can't traditionally publish? I mean, there's you know, it's all whatever you feel like doing now. I mean, I feel like now of all times, every option is available to explore.
Well, I would also say too, it's not even that, yes, you're right, all options are available, but you got to think about what Hollywood values.
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood values guaranteed return on their investment, because the price of production in the last 10 years, basically since I've been in Hollywood, has just astronomically blown through the roof.
Mm.
The roof isn't even a good enough analogy. It's blown through the stratosphere. It takes so much money, so much content's being made now, that the rentals have gone up. The price of that has gone way up. The cost of a good crew has gone way, way up. The cost of building materials because of the pandemic has gone way, way up. Like, it costs real money. Like, obviously, like when people start saying, oh, you know, the difference between an episode that costs $3 million and one that costs $8 million is, I mean, it's just millions of dollars. Who cares? But when you start timing that times 12, times 24, times 36, I mean, those numbers add up. So Hollywood needs guaranteed return on the millions of dollars that they're spending. That's why they care about China so much, because they can look at China and say, all right, we can know pretty clearly how much money we're going to make from there with this type of movie. So if you're coming, like, again, if you, Jeannie, have a spec script and you're coming to me and you're like, hey, I've got this really great story, people are going to love it. Am I going to buy that? Or am I going to turn around to the book franchise that has 25 million young adults who love it, and who, oh, by the way, it's got fans in the acting community. I already know that there are like 5 actors with name value who like this book series, would probably want to be in the adaptation for it. Oh, and this director brought it to me and he's pretty talented. So which one am I going to go to? One of the issues I always found very frustrating is the people who are knocking on the front door. A, there's a lot of them, and B, the front door isn't what matters. Hollywood is looking now for things that have fan bases that they can go and adapt things to, because they can then turn that into guaranteed return on their investment. So if you want a better chance of getting your story sold to Hollywood specifically, you might want to make it a book. You might want to see if you can get an audience in a way that is cheap, where the publisher only has to print hard copies rather than spend $50 million plus turning it into a movie.
What kind of advice would you give a writer who is interested in an IP, like a video game or maybe an underground comic book that has that underground following, if they wanted to acquire those rights to then shop it around into adapting it? What is the maybe right way or wrong way to not go about it, or go about it?
The wrong way to go about it is 100% just doing it. Like there are lots of instances where like you could be the army and just do it and be fine, but that's the wrong way to go about it, because I can't tell you the number of instances, having worked at a buyer, where we bought something believing that the controlling party had the rights and they didn't. And then we had to save egg on our face and go out and get the rights, because we had already announced that we had bought this thing, and then realized, oh wait, this person didn't have the rights to that thing. So definitely don't do that. If you're looking at like an underground property, I mean, the best way is just to reach out to the creators and say, hey, I'm a big fan of this. I'm a screenwriter. I really want to get take a shot at this. Can we do like a 6-month option agreement, just so I can hammer out a script and see how it goes? And you also, if you're that big of a fan of it and you want to write the script first, you can, and then just know that you can't do anything with it until you get that permission. But then if the author says, yeah, sure, you can have it for 6 months, go ahead, then at least you can wait a month and pretend like you wrote it in a month, and then send them the finished copy that you worked on for 6 months. That being said, I do think that the chances of that succeeding is going to be pretty slim nowadays, just because everyone knows that IP is the name of the game. And so giving up control of a property like that, it's going to be a pretty big thing. So again, if it's underground and super small and the writer doesn't know any better, they might do it. But if the writer has any brains about them, I don't think that they would take that option.
So like, what's the biggest mistake you see people doing, and what's like the thing about the industry that surprised you the most?
Biggest mistake in people's screenplays, like in their actual writing?
Sure. Let's talk about craft for a second, because we've been talking so much about the business.
In my experience, most writers are doing the same 6 things wrong. And if you're asking for the biggest mistake they make, I'm going to give you 2 that are tied at the top. Number 1 is they don't focus enough on leading with emotion. They lead with plot. They lead with what the character does. And that's a big mistake, because if I'm reading a script, you have to remember, I'm opening it up for the first time fresh. Every page, like if a page is a minute, which is the approximate time that it should take, or at least take to film. If I'm on page 20, I've been with your story for 20 minutes. You, the writer, on the other hand, have been in that story for weeks, months, years. You've been thinking about how every character feels and the emotional plot points that they have and the traumatic childhood that made them who they are. You care about that person, and that's why you love the story so much. You've got to make me care as much as you do, as fast as possible, because me just saying, okay, this character is now walking their dog, and this character is now doing a thing, and that thing makes them do another thing, and that thing makes them do another thing. I don't care about that. But if you can say, oh man, this character is super sad because their mother died, and you can make me, the reader, feel sad too that the mother died, then I'm like, oh, I feel something. I wonder how this is going to turn out. I'm invested now in this character's sadness. I don't want them to be sad. I want them to be happy. I'm going to keep turning the page to see if they become happy. I'm generally not going to keep turning the page to see if a character diffuses a bomb, because again, if a whole bunch of people that I don't care about might die because this bomb might go off, but I don't care about them, why would I read about them? You have to make the reader care. So that's number one. And the other, number two, is simply basic structure, like knowing how to structure a story, knowing how to bring in conflict, knowing how to have conflict, because so many writers, one of the common mistakes I see is that young writers love their characters so much, they're like, I don't want anything bad to happen to them, and so they'll inject conflict, and then 3 pages later the conflict is solved, and then there's no plot engine for the rest of the movie. And so I'm like, okay, cool, why did you solve this so fast? Like, this was your film and you solved it in a scene. You need to draw that out. You need to make sure that there is something going on, and the second act is about them solving that thing. It's not something that just happens like in the blink of an eye. So what I try to do with my business is I try to break down actual films. I try to sit through an entire film with my client and say, all right, this is the inciting incident. This is the problem. Look at the emotional anchor point here. Now let's look at how the second act of this film is all about this character this character having a problem that they're trying to solve. And then the third act is, do they solve the problem or not? And I think that when you can actually watch a successful movie, it might seem obvious, but it's obvious because it's well done. Like, that's why the movie got made, is because they hit on all of the very obvious markers. And then when you start comparing it to their material, that's when they go, oh, I see what I'm not doing here.
Yeah.
And some writers get mad at me because they go, well, you're just being very formulaic. Like, you want me to be like every other writer. And I say, well, is that a problem? Like, if you get a job as a formulaic writer who continues to churn out, specs that are all the same vein, are you gonna be mad at me? Because you're gonna be making hundreds of thousands of dollars every time that you write one of these. So is that an issue? And then B, I don't think it's formulaic. I think you're using the same stuff that Homer used around the campfire when he talked about the Odyssey. Like, there are fundamental building blocks of storytelling that have existed since the beginning of time, since the beginning of 3-act structure. And I think that there are lots of people out there who just need to learn those fundamental building blocks. Okay, so I can just chug this entire thing now.
Yeah, you can.
Chug, 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 chug.
I can't actually do that, no.
No, I don't think you could do that.
I like you lead off with the emotional part of it, because I think people are definitely afraid of that, putting themselves like that on the page. They'd rather, like, they think the movies are all about the big explosions or whatever it is, right? But yeah, you got to care, because I've read hundreds and hundreds of screenplays, and you're just like, yeah, 20 pages in, why do I care about our main character if you don't care as the writer to put in that time?
Correct.
Yeah.
One of the things that I say all the time to my clients is, it's not on me as the reader to find a reason to give a shit about your story. It's on you as the writer to give me a reason to give a shit about what's happening to your characters. If you can't do that, then there's no... If J.K. Rowling couldn't make people care about Harry Potter being with his demented step uncle or uncle or aunt or whatever it was, and make them say, man, I really want Harry to get out of this house, and then he gets the chance to go join this magical world of wizarding, no one would have read that book. it would not have become what it was. So you have to connect with the audience, and you have to give them a reason to care about what your character is going through. You have to. If you don't do it, no one, like, people might read your stuff, but they're not going to enjoy it.
You know, there's a piece of advice that everybody gets, like, write what you know, well, sometimes what you know is really boring. And if you haven't lived like a really interesting life, or, just you're just sitting around doing nothing, and what you know is that much. And so like the write what you know thing really drives me crazy, because you can research anything.
Mhm.
You can go experience stuff, travel, whatever. But even if you can't do that, I mean, we have this beautiful thing called the internet, the Library of Congress. Like,
Wait, what
there's
is Google? I've never heard of this. Can you
exact
explain
what
it to
is
me?
this thing? What
I
is
don't
this thing?
know.
And there's so many ways, like, so it makes me crazy when people get so hung up on that. The other
Mhm.
thing that makes me crazy is when people say, if you write a great script, the cream will rise to the top, as if it's going to magically get discovered without you putting it out there some way.
Correct.
Or, it's like you can't just write this amazing screenplay. I mean, you can, that would be lovely, but no one will find it unless
Right.
you put it out there.
Correct. Because I agree with that second point. The cream will rise to the top, but that
Mm-hmm.
assumes that you put it out into the ether and into writing contests and
Mm-hmm.
into people's hands, where they can say, oh, this is the cream, it has risen to the top because I like it so much. So I agree, yes, that's true, but also it's true that you need to do something with it. I will also say, in terms of the write what you know aspect, I'm going to say I agree with you, but only to an extent, because you're right. You can research how spies do things until you're blue in the face, and you can know, all right, I feel like I can write a realistic spy movie. But again, going back to the emotional point, no one's
Mm-hmm.
going to care if you can't connect the audience with that emotion that's going through, that the character is going through. So I would say, write what you know from an emotional standpoint.
Yes.
If you just went through a horrible grieving process about losing your grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
and you know how it feels, and you know what you had to overcome coming to terms with the death of this person in your life, write a spy movie about a spy who's on a mission while he's dealing with the death of somebody who really mattered to him. Like,
Yeah.
show him trying to complete this mission with the cool spy stuff, while on the back of his mind, distracting him from what he has to do all the time is, crap, my grandfather just died. This man
Mm-hmm.
was everything to me, and I loved him so much, because you know how that feels. There's a great line in, have you ever read On Writing by Stephen King?
Oh, yes. It was one of the first writing books I wrote.
It's
Amazing.
it's the best writing book
Yeah.
I've ever read. And there's a line in there where he talks about writing is telepathy. Like, you're punching keys and you're taking an image in your head and you're putting it on the page, and your mouth isn't moving. You're trying to take a image and putting it in someone else's brain. I want you to do the same thing with emotion. Whatever you're feeling, you need to put that feeling on the page, and you need to, like, transfer it through paper, through magic, into somebody else. That's what's going to make them continue on in your story. So you need to find the emotion that you're feeling, make it, again, take it from your body and put it into paper, and then send that paper off for someone else to take that feeling that you got, in order for you to be successful. Because otherwise, like me and Sadie were talking about, they're just not going to care. It's just not going to care.
And I think that's a thing, like I've written some things that I've never had experience doing that stuff before, but I always have thought about, what emotionally can I relate to about the circumstance that this person is going through?
Yes.
And that's always like the connecting factor, so that you can write about something like going to the moon, which I've obviously never done. But if I could find some emotional connection to the character, or something that's happening in their life that I can connect to, then it can be definitely more compelling.
Right.
Like, I'm writing a historical fiction novel right now, and taking place in the 1700s. And
Yeah.
what do I know about that? You know what I mean? But like, finding out that, certain aspects about his personal life have been really fun, because it's like, oh yeah, I can connect to that. You may have lived in the 1700s, but those same personal problems, maybe not those professional problems, but those personal problems that are still happening today to people, because we're all human.
Right. And I'm sure that you'll agree with this, Jeannie. It's the idea with emotion, you have to show it, not tell it. Because if there's a character who's afraid for their life, and the scene is they're in their house and they go to their roommate and they go, I'm afraid that my crazy boyfriend who I just broke up with might kill me. That's weak. That's cheap. No one's going to feel that. But if the scene starts with the roommate coming in and hearing a commotion in the other room and going to check on them, and it's the girl going into her closet and just grabbing all her clothes and just tossing them in a suitcase and zipping it up and not even packing it, and she's running around and she's just crazed and she's grabbing all her stuff because she's so afraid that her ex-boyfriend is going to come over there and kill her, then you're showing the reader, okay, this character is actually afraid for their life. I need to care about what's happening here. It brings the reader more fully into the world. And once, to me, that's the magic key that kind of unlocks a lot of writers' potentials. I've had 2 clients specifically who have struggled in the beginning, and then once they kind of learn the lesson of like showing the reader why to care, that's what I feel like so far in my experience is like open the door and kind of given them like the aha moment. And every script that I've read from them after that was 10 times better. It's never perfect, there's always notes, but like once they grasp that concept, things tend to come so much easier in my experience.
You said a magic word
awesome.
that I know Sadie loves. Notes.
Oh, I thought you were going to say ex-boyfriend.
No. Nobody likes those words.
Nobody likes those words.
No.
Can you tell the mimosa is starting to kick in?
Yeah.
Getting up.
Yeah, I love notes. Notes and the note behind the note.
Yes, the note behind the note is always critical.
And the art of taking notes and how to actually apply your work.
I will say, I think that, yeah, you're right. The art of taking notes is, especially for someone who wants to be a professional writer, understanding that as a professional writer, you're writing for somebody else. Because if you're writing for yourself, then you can write whatever the hell you want. But if you're writing to get paid, you need to write to satisfy the person who's paying you. And really coming to grips with what that means, and knowing that the story starts out as being yours, but then it's going to evolve into being somebody else's, is a really important thing. But then the idea of understanding what the note is actually saying, because, you know, I've been doing this for 10 plus years now. I can tell you without a doubt, the notes I gave in the early part of my career were not as good as the notes I give now. It's just not even close. And I feel like through practice, through doing it hundreds upon thousands, maybe tens of thousands of times now, I feel like my notes are pretty clear. And generally when I give a note on something, I don't just give the what to change, I give the why to change it. But not every person has that ability and that clarity. And so saying, okay, they want me to take out this subplot in the second act, but I think it's really important for the emotional knowledge of the character. Why do they want me to take it out? I think the note is actually saying the second act drags on. Let me try to pace it up. Let me try to find something else to cut that's going to get to it faster, so I can keep this thing that I want and still give them what they're actually looking for to kind of get through this thing faster. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not, but you do need to figure out what people are actually saying with their notes, because there's layers to a script. There's the topical plot stuff, and then there's the things that are happening underneath, and sometimes you have to find the deeper dive into what those things are. Yeah.
I love getting feedback, and I
can't wait to read your book then.
And I like getting really honest feedback. Like and then I like to, sometimes I cry. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm not sure I'm buying into what you want me to do, but it's just a scene, so I'm going to write it. And then in writing it and trying it on, you can all of a sudden, a lot of times it ends up being, oh, okay. And I won't have executed it the same way they wanted me to, or they suggested that I did, but I found a way to execute it in a way that worked for me emotionally, story-wise, whatever. And then it was like, now I understand why you told me to do this. You know, so sometimes you have to try it before you really understand the note behind the note.
During the pandemic, I bought Masterclass, which was mostly a waste of money, in my opinion. But I listened to the Neil Gaiman Masterclass, which, again, I love Neil Gaiman. He's my favorite author. I've got the entire Sandman series right here and like 3 other of his books. Like I think he's probably one of the greatest living authors. But there was one thing he said that I really thought stood out, which was, if you give it to 10 people, the thing that you've written, and 8 of them come back, say the exact same thing, that's a pretty consistent problem. You should probably listen to that note. But if you give it to 8 people or to 10 people and they all come back saying different things, that's just opinions. And then your opinion supersedes theirs. But that's the note that you follow. The one that where you can tell, okay, this is what the audience in mass thinks, and that's not my intention for it. So let me work on that. That's the important part of that. You know, when you're given notes by a development executive, it's always your choice whether to take it, but you also need to be wary of the fact that, especially if you're a professional writer, these are the people who decide if you move on to production or to series. And in production and in series comes more money, comes the promise of continued paychecks. And so, yes, you can say, I'm not going to take that note, or I'm not going to take any of these notes. I'm just going to cut around the edges because I think it's good enough. But again, if you're a professional writer writing to make other people happy, then you might need to take notes that you don't want to make. You might need to change things you don't want to change in order to get your overall goal, which is get paid.
I think we kind of came full circle on that. It's, you know, writing what you know to a certain extent, right? And what you enjoy. Doing something that makes you happy in this industry. But also there's that idea of success of, well, you want a paycheck. So
correct.
Give into the machine and churn out the stuff that kills your soul just so you have a roof over your head.
And now it means generals and meetings and going out on, you know, open writing assignments and pitching my idea and writing things that aren't my ideas and rewriting other writers and taking writing credit away from another writer. I mean, there's some like ugly, icky things that you have to like wrap your brain around, that this is what being a professional screenwriter is.
It's how the sausage gets made, man. I mean, that's life, right? We all have skills and we're trying to get compensated for our skills to the highest possible dollar value. One of the things that I don't think a lot of writers realize is once you make that first sale, that's probably what you're going to be doing for the foreseeable future. Because like, let's say, like what you said, you write a spec. Let's say you write like a indie horror spec. It's not something that you normally do, but you just tried it. It turned out really well and you sell it. Your agent sells it. What do you think after that sale, your agent's going to send people as your sample? They're going to send people the sample that sold. They're going to be like, hey, look, this is the spec that sold. Lionsgate's producing it. It's got this director on it. It's in the process. Like, that's the impressive sample. And so what are they going to use a horror spec for? Horror open assignments, horror rewrites, things of that nature, horror franchises. Like, you might want to write dramatic stuff like True Detective, but if you haven't written something that's gotten traction in that vein, your agent can't get you those jobs because no one's going to hire you to write True Detective based off a horror sample. But these emerging writers out there don't necessarily realize how the business works, in the sense of like, yeah, you might write a specific genre really well, but then you need to recognize that those are the jobs that you're going to get moving forward from that.
I don't really know how I feel about emerging writers. I certainly like it better than aspiring. I cannot stand that expression, because it's like, if I'm putting words on the page, I'm not aspiring to write, I'm writing.
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm actually writing.
This is the conversation that you and Matt and I got into, and I would love to get Sadie's opinion on this.
Yeah, I would too.
Coming up in the business, Sadie, I got very used to saying baby writers. And baby doesn't mean anything in terms of age or in terms of gender or in terms of race. It just means your career stature. Like, if you're a writer who is writing specs and hasn't sold anything, you're a baby. You don't have any experience yet. And once you make that sale, you start gathering the credits and you start moving up, and all of a sudden you're not a baby anymore. You're a working professional writer. But Matt showed me a Twitter thread that was getting quite a lot of traction, possibly based off one of the articles I wrote where I say baby writer, because I say it a lot. And people were complaining, I don't want to be known as a baby writer. I'm not a baby. It's infantisilizing me. I don't like it. I think, and people were commenting that emerging was more correct. Now, I have problems with emerging writers because, as you were saying, Jeannie, I feel like you can't tell me you're emerging. Like, that's like an NFL player or like a football player wanting to play in the NFL and saying, well, I'm an emerging NFL quarterback. well, you don't have an NFL job. You don't have an NFL tryout. You're just a guy who wants to play quarterback. You can't tell me you're an emerging talent. The NFL tells me that. Like the NFL tells me, oh, you signed to a team? Okay, you're an emerging talent. Just like that, you can't tell me you're an emerging writer. But that is apparently the politically correct stance nowadays. And I'm just curious about it because, quite frankly, I don't like saying it, and I would like to find a reason to stop.
Well, I think just like any Twitter trend, emerging writers can probably last another week until baby writer. Yeah, that's something I've always heard. I've never been offended by it. And to Jeanne's point, I mean, if you're an emerging writer, you're a writer. So just say that you're a writer, but I think it just depends on where you are in your stage in that career as a writer.
I agree completely.
Yeah, I mean, it's all up for discussion, but I think, you know, baby writer, it just shows that you're just that much closer to popping, right, and getting in.
Right.
Have that than like the nobody writer, or
if only it only took 9 months.
Right, exactly. And oftentimes I will say young writer only because like you might be a 40-year-old who just decided to start writing 2 years ago. 2 years out of 40, you're pretty new to that idea. And so you're still young in your career as a writer, as opposed to like Neil Gaiman, who's been writing for like 30, 40 years now and who has had massive amounts of success. So I don't think that young writer is offensive either, but this is why I don't go onto Twitter very often. I only go to check once my articles get posted to see what people say about them. That's the only reason I
forced him to come back. Like I started tagging him in things. I'm sure he was getting alerts like, I haven't gotten a Twitter alert in forever.
Basically, it was like I logged on. It was like, you have 20 plus alerts. And I'm like, oh God, what did I say that blew up? Am I getting canceled yet? I knew it was going to happen one day. Yeah. So,
well, I wonder, like, writers who are more seasoned, do they prefer to be called veteran writers? Does that age them out?
People will say veteran scribe. I mean, I've definitely heard, like on Deadline articles, they would say like this veteran scribe is rep by this place and that place. So I don't think it ages them out. I think it's like a level of stature. Like you've leveled up, like you've achieved veteran status in the business. So
yeah, I mean, I don't, because then when you're saying like, even you're saying aspiring writer, emerging writer, I don't really know that there is a good appropriate label for that, which I think is hard for people, you know, because they want to be able to identify as a writer. You know, like that's also part of it. You know, they want, which is, Sadie had given a quote before you came on. See, now I need my Prevagen and vitamins.
Was it
Sadie, what was your quote?
Confidence. It was about confidence. And say the quote, and then I'll finish my thought.
Yeah, it's a Mark Twain quote. It goes, to succeed in life, you need two things: ignorance and confidence.
Yep. That's true.
And so perhaps labeling themselves as writer, whatever you preface it with, helps give them that confidence to keep going, because it's what they want to do. And maybe for people, identifying as a baby writer doesn't quite give them the confidence that they need. It's like now, this whole
I can understand that point. And again, I would say if you want to call yourself an emerging writer, go ahead. Don't expect me to call you an emerging writer until I've given you, until other people have bestowed that upon you. And then that Mark Twain quote, Sadie, I think is actually very similar to another Neil Gaiman, always comes back to Neil, quote, where he said, in order to be a successful writer, you need to have the confidence of an 8 to 10-year-old boy, the ability to not know at all what you're doing, but you don't care, you just do it anyway. And that like allows you to try things that you would never have thought might work, or that other people might tell you it's not going to work, and then all of a sudden you try it and it does work, and then you become a superstar overnight.
And I think that, you know, that's like perfect timing, because last night we watched Big. Haven't seen Big in so long. And so as I'm watching it and I'm watching him, it's like that age where you have no inhibitions. So he's just like testing the toys, doing all the things that come naturally to him. He's not worried about what other people think or what they care about him. And I think that's that thing. If you can write like that, like Stephen King says in On Writing, write with the door shut. Like, don't worry about what people think. Don't worry about anybody else reading this. Just be authentic and really pour it onto the page, you know, and not filter yourself. And just like you, Spike, unfiltered.
Oh, mine just comes for not knowing when I should shut up. However, if you ladies can't tell, my mimosa is almost gone. So whatever big like nuclear bomb questions you wanted to ask in this, now's the time.
Because I remember you mentioned, Jeannie, before you popped on, Spike, was something about contracts and knowing your worth as a writer. How do you establish yourself and ask for money for projects?
Man.
Do we need to pause while you go pour another one?
I don't have any more orange juice left, so I can't.
You can just drink the champagne.
Well, to be completely honest, this was an entire bottle of champagne in this glass. So I don't have any more champagne left. That is such a tricky question, Sadie. I don't know. I think that's one of those case-by-case basis thing. You have to be okay with the idea of them dropping you. So going back to the confidence idea, you have to be confident enough in your writing ability to get another job if that one doesn't play out. So you kind of have to act as though you have options when you don't. I mean, I'm a big believer in artists getting paid what they're worth. Unfortunately, Hollywood doesn't feel the same way. Hollywood's a bottom line business. And especially for like directors, you have to pay, actors, you have to pay, crew you can skimp on, but a lot of times people try to skimp on writers' fees. And this is one of the issues that the Writers Guild of America has had for a very long time, is that writers' pay has not been going up in appropriate equal fashion to the price of the cost of movies and the cost of other talent. So this is why I think that it's much, if I was ever going to be a writer in 2021, I would not make it my main hustle. I would have either a business on the side or a day job that fulfilled me, that paid my bills, and I would write in my spare time, because in the day and age of strict budgets and micro budgets and the freaking Jason Blum model, which is pay nobody until I absolutely have to, there's a high chance that you're not going to get paid. And I've seen those fights play out, and they're not always pretty. So there's no clean cut answer to that one.
You know, a lot of people equate money with success, and in it, you know, when you're writing, like when I first started writing and I would write articles or, you know, guest blogging on somebody's site or reviews of things or whatnot, I was starting. I had no published clips. Nobody wanted to pay me anything. They thought they were doing me a favor to let them, you know, to let me write for them. And
they're paying you with exposure, Jeannie.
Exactly.
Why are you not
you're
grateful?
getting exposure. And that just makes me want to vomit. But I recognized in the beginning, I didn't have any hand. You know, like I had no hand. I was a baby writer. And it was like, wah, like, too bad. Like I had no hand. I had nothing I could do. So what I did, for all you people out there who are in that spot and you're looking for published clips, especially if you want to write for magazines or whatever, online sites or whatever, to get that your voice out there, which I would also recommend, because a lot of people discovered me as a you know, wanting to read my novels or read my screenplays because they read my articles. So they knew I could tell a story in 1,200 words. So they wanted to see so they wanted to see what I could tell in larger words. That's actually the story of how both my writing partner and Doug Richardson first read my work, because they were reading my articles on Script Magazine and they were reading the blogs that I would write on my own website. And Doug Richardson, after about 6 months of knowing him, I never asked him to read my stuff. He was reading my articles and he said, he calls me up one day and he goes, you know, you can write. Like, I want to read this script. And I'm like, okay. And then he ended up coming onto the project because he gave me notes and he liked the way I took notes and then said, can I come on and help you with this? And we never got it produced, but it was you want to talk about a masterclass. I mean, a masterclass working with him and Tom Schulman. I mean, it was like incredible. But so what I did, but circling back to the articles in the very beginning, I would ask people, anybody wanted me to write for free, I would say, okay, but can you go on my LinkedIn and like write me a recommendation? Like, can you do like, so at least I was getting something for it.
Sure.
And that made me feel like I was being valued, because that recommendation meant more to me than $50,
Right. Yeah.
And
you're working a trade in that point.
Right. And then that gets you the next job, because then I've got published clips I could put up on my site that to use to query other publications that would pay me money. So it was like it was a win-win.
And just like going back to the Hollywood working in the business side of it, and like everyone has to intern to start to make the relationships, and that's how you're getting paid. You're not getting paid in money, you're getting paid in relationships. And when I was starting out, there was the whole fight about, well, is unpaid interns really an ethical thing to do? Should we be doing it? There was the whole lawsuit about asking for free work for things like that because it didn't follow the laws. And I understood it, but in the same sense, I mean, like you have nothing to offer those people at that point. I mean, the articles is a slightly different thing because you are giving them content to put on their website, but you're working out a trade of at least value to you, where you're getting something out of it. Now, you can't do that forever. You can't work for free forever, because at some point you do have to eat. But just starting out, I don't think there's anything wrong with writing for free. Since I've been publishing on Pipeline Artists, there have been two or three, I think 2 outlets that have come to me and said, hey, we want you to write for us. And I'm looking at their pay scale and I'm like, why would I go to you? Like there's no incentive for me to do that. Like I would rather just continue to publish my ideas on Pipeline Artists.
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, congrats, like there you go.
And I want to actually like circle back to the reason your stuff is so good. And like when and I actually owe Sadie a Balls of Steel article for Script Magazine, because it's that and this is the same approach I take with Balls of Steel, which I think the book is coming out June 1st, by the way.
What is Balls of Steel, though? I don't know.
Balls of Steel is a article I was writing for Script Magazine for like 10 years. And
like a series,
a series, like a regular series, and about how it takes balls of steel to be a writer and to be in this industry, and just to live life.
That's damn true.
Right.
Yeah, that's damn true.
Yeah. And but I think why your stuff is so popular speaks to exactly what you recommend to your writers, who your clients. It's getting to the authentic core. You're not sugarcoating anything. You're going right to it. And you're passionate about what you're writing about because you want to help the reader. Like you want them to learn something. And so you're not like, oh, well, yeah, maybe, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to steal your stuff, and then move on. Like you go into like to really explain to them so they understand, like, what's going on here and how to look at things. And I think that's why, just like if you were writing a screenplay, your graphic novel or whatever, when you tap into that authenticity, people love it and it resonates with them and they come back for more.
Totally. Yeah, no, look, the articles I write for Pipeline are what I would tell people pretty consistently if they saw me in person. They're the exact same things. They're just more well plot out and probably more articulate because I have a chance to go back and edit them and make them sound pretty. They also probably contain about 20% fewer curse words than I would probably put in like a normal conversation. But I agree with you in the sense of like, one of the things I tell my clients is don't give so much of a shit about if someone likes your work. Just write. Like, if you like what you're writing, the chances are that someone else is going to as well. And so you're not writing to make someone out there happy. You're writing to find 1 million people who are like you and resonate with your voice, and you're there to make them happy. If there's any I have many thoughts on the content explosion that we're going through in terms of television and streaming and having 500, 600, 700, however many shows there are now out on the web and being produced. But if there's anything that showed, is that you don't need to be 100 million people's favorite show to be successful. If you can be 1 million people's favorite, that's all it takes. Hell, might be less than that. If you can be 500,000 people's favorite, that's enough. Like for Big Little Lies, what was the sequel to that? Was it like Broken Mirrors or something? I'm drunk. I can't quite remember it.
I don't remember the title.
Shards, like Pretty Shards or something. Like whatever it was, like the sequel to that got all this acclaim in Hollywood. Everyone was talking about it. You know what the numbers on that were? Less than 1 million viewers. Nobody watched it, but it's like it had enough of a following and it was on the right network with the right people to where it still got all this buzz because it had all the right elements, even though it was a very niche show. You don't need to be everyone's favorite. Perfect example again. One of the shows I worked on at my last company, and I won't name the name because I'm not quite that drunk yet, but that show survived for 5 seasons. We only pulled in like 1 million viewers an episode. Like we didn't pull in that many, but for us, that was good enough. It was a metric that worked. It kept us going. We made a profit on that. And we made extra viewers up, not in the actual air, but we made it up in the repeat viewing and the going on our website and watching the episode there with commercials. Like we made bigger numbers than that, but the hardcore fans who watched it every week whenever it came on, I think it was like 1.1, maybe 1.2, like a really good episode. You don't need to appease the masses. You just need to find your core audience. And if that core audience is big enough, you're going to be valuable to somebody in Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, Spike, thank you so much for perfect timing. He just swigged the last gulp. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this afternoon and chatting about all this. And I think you might be onto something. I think we might have to turn this podcast into like a drunk history, like where we make all our guests drink.
That one.
Yeah, we make all of our guests drink all throughout the show and see where they go.
I loved it. No, this was great. I really enjoyed it. Nice meeting you, Sadie. Always good talking to you, Jeannie. I cannot wait to send you my latest article.
Oh,
and
yes.
When I sober up, I might start another one. Who knows? The world is my oyster.
Or you can start it before you sober up.
We'll see how that one turns out. I'm not sure about that.
Reckless Creatives is a Pipeline Artists original podcast. Like, subscribe, and follow us on social media at Pipeline Artists. And find more info at pipelineartists.com/listen. Until next time, stay reckless.